I'm not sure
Yes.
introduction is necessary. We have the founder of Eurovan with us today.
Yes, we
Who
do.
is the person who's responsible for the reason we're all here today. So thank you very much for joining us, Christopher, and please run us through Espectacle.
Yes, no, well, it's a pleasure, and thank you for joining me and for listening to the story of Espectacle. I think some of you may have been there, some of you may know it. I expect all of you tasted it. If not, hopefully you will do soon. But I'll give you a bit of background of the history, and also the details on the location, the grape varieties, and the soil, as well as the harvest and the vinification. And then I'll taste a glass with you. I know it's early for some of you in the morning to taste, but it's okay for us in Europe. Espectacle started out as a project with René Barbier of Clos-Magadeau. We founded back in the late 90s a company called La Rona in the region of Montsant. And Montsant is the region that surrounds the Priorat. And I'll show you later a map. In fact, I can probably show you now. Let's see, I can probably show you the map now. Here's a map that Kirk sent me yesterday. And we've tried to point out where Priorat is. In fact, where Montsant is. It's in northeastern Spain, not far from Barcelona. I think you all know that. A bit inland from the Mediterranean, and very mountainous region. And on the map, you'll see a lighter colored part, which is in fact Priorat. And Montsant is the darker color that surrounds Priorat almost completely. And I often describe it, there's two ways of describing it. One is a fried egg, the yolk being Priorat and the white being Montsant surrounding it. Another way is a donut with the jam in the middle as Priorat and the rest of the donut as Montsant. And there you can see how the land lies. In fact, the political area of Priorat includes Montsant, a large part of Montsant. And so you can see the town of Falset at the bottom, which is the capital, the political capital of Falset, but it's not within the Priorat region. It's in the administrative region, the Priorat, but it's not in the Priorat region. It's actually based in Montsant. And we had a company based in Falset called La Rona, and we selected some very special cuvées, one cuvée called Seis Viñas de La Rona. And for that cuvée, we sought out the best vineyards we could find. And we shortly discovered that the region on the western side, where you see the word Espectacle Vineyard, the bright yellow spot, just next to that, there's a village called La Figuera. La Figuera means the fig tree. It's a very high village. It's about 700 meters up. It's the highest village by far in the Montsant region. And it's famous for Grenache. Practically all the vineyards in the area are Grenache. And then we visited one day a vineyard, which we found very steep with some very, very old vines. And that vineyard, we decided was so special that it would be a good idea to bottle the wine separately. So we separated the wine from the cuvée that we were making, Seis Viñas de La Rona. We bought a brand new vat to make it in, and we started making Espectacle from the 2004 vintage. We were basically three families that got together to do this, and that you'll see on the label. René Barbier and his wife Isabel, me and my wife Charlotte, and Marta and Fernando Zamora, who are both enologists. Marta is more viticulturist, and Fernando is the head of the enology department in Tarragona University, and was helping René with a lot of the vinification. So those were the three partners originally. Now there's a couple more partners, but those are the main founders of Espectacle. There you can see where the hand is, where Espectacle Vineyard is located, at the western edge of the Montsant district, at the highest point in the whole of the Montsant. That you will understand better when I show you the photographs. So I can show you now the photographs to give you an idea of what the vineyard is like. Very, very steep. As I was saying, very high altitude, the highest vineyard in the Montsant district, over 700 meters, probably the highest in Montsant and Priorat as well, although there are also some vineyards in Priorat at about that level. Very steep, very difficult to work, and these pictures give you an idea of how steep it is. Now, this picture, you can see quite a long way into the distance. Usually on a clear day, you can see, especially in the spring, you can see the Pyrenean mountains in the distance. But that day, when I took the photograph, it wasn't clear enough. But that's over 100 miles away. So the views are extraordinary. And that's why we call when we went there, when I went there with René, we said to each other, the views here are spectacular. In front of us, we had the Pyrenees in the distance. On the left, we have the Ebro Valley. And on the right, the side of the Montsant mountain. And we said to each other, this is spectacular. Now we have a name, Espectacle. It's never been easier to find a name for a wine. And so that's how it started. It's a very small vineyard. It's only about 2 hectares altogether. And you can see here the different angles. And then in the distance, in this photo, you can see the Montsant mountain in rather hazy distance. There you can see the steepness, how difficult it is to work. Everything has to be done by hand. The vineyard is, of course, organically farmed. It always has been. And here you can see a little bit more of the soil. This is in winter. You can see it's quite a chalky soil. So the chalk and clay is the main base of the soil at Espectacle. Here you can begin to see how old the vines are. Many of them were planted pre-phylloxera and are still ungrafted. And so they're over 120 years old. And they're still going strong. Very small production, of course, but great quality. There again, you can see the steepness. You can see the views in the distance. You can see a very long distance. Here you can get another view. This is further halfway down the hillside. Again, the very old vines. Stop me if you want to ask a question.
It's very difficult, unless you visit, it's very difficult to get a real impression for the steepness of the slope.
Yes.
And the view that you have. So the vineyard is facing due north, is that correct?
Facing due north, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Towards the Pyrenees, yeah. So
yes, towards Pyrenees. This is an autumn afternoon, as you can see. It's already in the shade.
Yeah.
So you can get an idea of how steep it is in this photograph. Probably that's the one that gives you the best impression of steepness. And then at the bottom, you can see it's flatter. That is not for Espectacle, that's for another wine. The Espectacle vines are all on the slope. Again, you can see a little bit of the steepness. The hardest work of all is to keep the walls intact. It's, every time there's a storm, there's always some trouble with the walls. So we're constantly repairing the walls, but very little erosion from the soil. It's just as long as we keep the walls intact, we're okay. So that gives you an idea. And then you can see a good view of really, there you can see how old some of the vines are. Some of these vines need their branches propped up with stones. They're so fragile. So each vine has to be treated with enormous care.
So Christopher, what is the actual history of the vineyard? Do you know that the person who owns it, did they plant it, or did their forefathers plant it? What's the actual history of that?
It goes back a long way. It's been in the same family for at least 2 centuries. There's a picture of the owner here.
That's fantastic.
Here's the owner on the right, and he helps us. He's also today he's also part owner of the Espectacle project, and on the left is René Barbier. And he helps us still with working the vineyard. And it's been in his family for at least 200 years. It's probably his great-grandfather who planted the vines which are currently producing Espectacle.
And Christopher, what were the grapes used for, or what happened to the grapes before the?
Practically all the grapes of La Figuera went to the local cooperative, and were not used to make any particular wine.
So these fantastic grapes were getting lost in a sort of a huge vat of local wine.
The blend, yes, and very little attention until the late 80s, early 90s, like in Priorat. Very little attention was made to making quality wines. People were looking more for high alcoholic wines for blending and for selling in bulk, often to France, to improve the quality of the big volume wines of the south of France. So it was more the alcohol that was important than the quality. And but when you produce Grenache in tiny quantities, and same with Carignan, you can have really outstanding quality wines. That's the vineyard in the summer. Looking up, a very steep part we saw in the other photographs is at the top there. And that gives you an idea, and that's in the autumn, in the fall. Again, looking towards Mont Sainte. Mont Sainte is the mountain which is the name of the appellation, but it's also the mountain that dominates the whole area. And then occasionally we do, that's René with the owner, and occasionally we do meals. There's a little there used to be a little restaurant in the village of La Figuera, and we would do tastings. This was a breakfast, in fact. The restaurant would bring down the food, and we would open the bottles.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else listening who has had the opportunity to visit the vineyard. I've been fortunate enough to enjoy a tasting of Espectacle in the middle of the vineyard when you're sitting on those chairs, enjoying the view, and it's quite an amazing experience to have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a photograph of the bottle, and then when we had to design a label, which is important, of course. René Barbier's wife, Isabel, is an artist, and she produced this picture. Initially, the picture had 2 chairs on it, the original, and then we told her that, look, with 3 families, we need a 3rd chair. So we painted in a 3rd. She painted in a 3rd chair, and there we are with the 3 chairs on the label. It's not an easy label to photograph because it takes up most of the bottle. That's why we've done 2 photographs of the bottle, so you can see a little bit of how it's shaped. Now, to give you a little more information about the winery and the wines, I've told about the views. The climate is very, very similar to that of Priorat, very Mediterranean, hot summers, cold winters, very cold winters. The high altitude and the exposure of the vineyard mean that ripening is, and especially since it's north facing, ripening is late. We never pick the grapes until October, and sometimes into early November, depending on the vintage. This, of course, also is combined with the altitude. The place is very interesting. It's next to the village of La Figuera, and if you go on a little bit further up the mountain, you come to a ermita. Not the ermita of Priorat, but this is the ermita of Mont Sainte. And it's from that ermita that during the Spanish Civil War, they surveyed the Battle of the Ebro, which took place on the other side of the river Ebro, from the mountain where the ermita is. You could see the whole of the valley of the Ebro from there, and they could control the battle. The Republicans could control the battle from the top of the mountain above Espectacle. And some people call Espectacle the ermita of Mont Sainte. And there is a true ermita at the top of the mountain. That's the views. Then the grape variety, as I was saying, the age is over 120 years old for all those vines. We're gradually having to replant, of course, those that die, but very few seem to do that, luckily for the moment. All is a Grenache, 100%. And the soil, as I say, is chalky clay.
So Christopher, the yields must be extremely low. These vines are 120 years old.
Yes.
Obviously, the conditions for growing are very, very difficult.
Yes.
What kind of yields do you get in Espectacle?
It's minute. It's maybe it probably takes three or four vines to give us one bottle of wine,
right,
altogether. Yeah. It's tiny.
It's quite unique.
Yes.
Do you have any problems?
Pierrat on average is about 12 hectares per hectare. And I guess we're near half that, depending on the vintage.
And so, right. So from that 2 hectares, you get how many bottles?
Use about 5,000.
Right. So that's what you were going back to saying about the vinification in one vat. So that's
yes,
one.
I was coming to that because since it's Monsanto and the same way as in Pierrat, the wines have to be bottled by law within the Monsanto appellation. We can't take the grapes to Clos Mogador and bottle it here. We have to bottle it in Monsanto. So we take the grapes to Falset, and there we have the La Rona cellar, a vat of 4,000 liters. That is a vat in French oak, the highest quality we can find. And that vat is used for the whole process. It's used for the vinification, maceration, of course. Then the wine is racked off, the vat is cleaned, and the wine is then put back for aging. And it will age for another 18 months in that same vat. After bottling, without filtration or minimum filtration, hopefully it's not necessary, we sell the vat. So it's a new vat for every vintage. And but it's a large vat, 4,000 liters, so the wood does not give too much influence to the wine. We want a balance between the oak and the wine.
Christopher, do you use the same cooper each year when you replace the vat?
Good question. Not necessarily, but usually, if we're pretty happy with one, we usually stick with them for a few years and then change. I think the one we had recently is Boots, but we've had another one before that. But occasionally we'll change. And then we buy the vats. So Mogador has several of those vats in their cellar once they've been used for a Spectacle. I wanted to buy one for our Clos Figueras, but it didn't fit through the door. So we have to think again.
I was going to say, if anyone has been to Clos Mogador, you will see several vats which have come from Espectacle.
Yeah, which are initially for Espectacle. So then it's bottled, and then after bottling, we keep the wine in bottle for about 8 to 10 months before release on the market. And currently, it's the 2017 vintage, which is just been released, or was released this winter. And then the wine is very special. Do you have any questions before we go on?
There was a couple of questions that came in, Christopher.
Yes.
First of all, do you have any problems with frost with the altitude and the north-facing vineyards, and with the harvest as well?
Not really. We've very seldom had problems with frost, and that's because it's very windy up there. And usually frost damage is in the valley floors and things like that. There we have no problem with that because it's very exposed, very windy.
And then there was another question about the vinification. So you decide to change the fermentation vat every year. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason you do that, or why did you do that?
The fermentation.
Yes, so the vat. This 4,000 liter vat. Is that?
Yes, we keep it for the whole process, the same vat. We only take the wine out to rack it after fermentation and maceration, and then put it back in the same vat. So we use always the same vat. Why we change it? Well, that's been really a strategy to have a little bit of oak influence in the wine, but not too much. The Grenache generally doesn't like small oak barrels. It oxidizes easily when it's in bulk. You'll notice if you go to Châteauneuf du Pape, also the very few people that have small Bordeaux-shaped barrels of 225 liters, they usually have large oak foudre for the aging of their wines. And it's the same in Spain too. Most of the great Grenache wines are made in larger volumes because of the oxidization, which is always a problem if you use smaller oak barrels.
Sure.
For the risk of oxidization.
Christopher, do you ferment with native yeasts?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's native yeast. Obviously, it's always a question people ask. Every year, we'd like to always use native yeast, but it may be 1 year, 2 years. It may range as for a harvest or something like that, where you do have to help the wine a little bit. But of course, one always prefers to use native yeast. One can, and usually we have never had any problems with that.
You may have mentioned it. Do you actually destem or partially destem?
No, destemmed. Destemmed, yes. And it was a sorting table, a vibrating sorting table, which Remy also uses at Mogador for the selection of the grapes before they go into the cask for fermentation.
Right.
So that gives you an idea of the background. Now, for the
so what was the first vintage again, Christopher?
The first vintage.
Yep.
Yes. So the project we initiated in 2003. The first vintage was 2004, right. And that vintage scored 99 points from our friend Robert Parker, and he really helped put the wine on the map from the very start. It also helped put Monsanto on the map, because Monsanto is a very recent appellation for denomination. It was founded in 2001, only in 2001. So when we founded Espectacle, it had only been in existence for 3 years, but Espectacle has really become a kind of leader and pioneer of Monsanto, and a kind of locomotive, in fact. There's a great wine produced in that region. Part of it, of course, is the location of the vineyard, but also the soil, because chalky clay, a lot of chalk. There are very few vineyards with a lot of chalk in Spain. It's one of the few. And chalk, as you know, is great for making great wines, which is the case in Champagne, Chablis, and various other places. And we could equally well plant white grapes in that vineyard, but that's not going to be the case. Now we can. I've got a bottle here to show you a little bit what we do. Taste the wine with you. I know it's early in the day for you to taste in America. What I like to do always with this wine, and René also recommends this, is decant it at least an hour before.
Sorry, how long do you decant it for, Christopher?
This is the 2012. About an hour. We're tasting in 2004. You probably don't need to decant it. But for this one, it's the 2012. This was 99 points from our friend Parker, and it benefits tremendously from an hour decanting. I'm putting it in a large glass, because the larger the glass, the more exposure it gets. It needs exposure to air, and it's one of those wines which is really unique. The Grenache in the past has always had a reputation, especially in France, for producing rather ordinary wines. That's because people were inclined to produce big quantities, big yields, and pick too early. And usually the result was very insipid wines, too much alcohol, and not much flavor. Here we're doing exactly the opposite. Very small quantities, and plenty of concentration and depth, and very careful aging. The alcohol level is usually about 14.5, 15, which is classic for the region. The alcohol argument is very basic. It's always a question of balance. And as you know, in Priorat, we're not allowed to go below a certain level. We're not allowed to go below 13.5. And most of the wines in the area, whether they be Priorat or Monsanto, especially Priorat, but Monsanto too, especially the good ones, are over 14, 14.5 alcohol. So, and the question is to have exactly the right balance, and you shouldn't feel the alcohol. You should feel the fruit. The fruit should dominate the alcohol, and this is the case with the Espectacle, and we're looking here at a wine which has got tremendous elegance, but at the same time freshness, lovely fruit, classic Grenache fruit. And I consider it to be among the great Grenache wines of the world. One can name a few, especially Chateau Reyas and others that are fantastic as well. But this is also one that ranks, I think, with one of the best. More and more people are beginning to make pure Grenache, and we're going to see more and more very good Grenache wines on the market. But I think Espectacle will rank with one of in the top league. Anyway, good health. And unfortunately, I can't drink with you because it's early in the morning, but I have a sip.
Christopher, I'm joining you. So I had a bottle of 12, so I hate to see a man drink alone.
You're whetting my appetite, Christopher.
Yeah, I'll be round in a minute.
My son is okay. Welcome. My son
this evening
will help me finish it. Sorry.
Christopher, we had a question.
Yes.
How is global warming affecting the older Grenache vines in the vineyard? Are you doing anything differently from a farming standpoint to protect them?
Not really. It hasn't really affected us a lot. It's very cool up there, even in summer. Summer evening, it's very cool and very exposed. And the vines have been there for so long that they're really not really affected by that at all. It's always hot in summer and cold in winter, but there's always wind. And until now, we've had to do very little to cope with global warming. The big problem with global warming is the alcohol levels. I guess we can pick a bit earlier to counter that, but at the same time, we want to have perfect ripeness of the grapes. So it's always a question of balance. A huge amount of attention is paid to the date we pick. We have to pay a lot of attention to that because we have to get the perfect ripeness. We mustn't have too much alcohol in the wines, and at the same time, we must have perfect phenolic ripeness. So we can get the right balance. The wine I've just tasted is tasting beautifully now. It has the perfect balance between the fruit and the alcohol and the acidity. And the acidity is also a key. The Grenache is not a grape variety that has a lot of tannin. It's not like a Bordeaux. It doesn't have any Cabernet. And in order for it to age well, it needs that acidity. And so again, we can't pick too late either because we lose the acidity. So it's very crucial that we choose the right moment to pick. The acidity helps the wine age, and the 2004, the first vintage, is still holding up well after now 15 years, 20 years.
Yeah, but I have a question about the best time to drink it. Obviously, the best wine to drink right now is the current vintage, from a commercial standpoint.
Yes.
What age is the wine is the best time to drink?
Grenache, again, is one of the beauties of Grenache. It's a wine you can appreciate young, and if it has good acidity, it can age very well. Chateauneuf du Pape, everybody says it's a wine we should drink after 10. One can drink up until 10 years old, and many of them even older. But here, I think, because of the conditions and the altitude and the climate, we can keep the wines longer, and we're finding that the 2004 is still very bright. The fruit's still very evident, and the acidity is still there, of course. It probably should be drunk within the next 3 to 5 years, but it's still fine after 16 years. The 2005, which for some reason was never shown to Parker, so it never got scores, is showing beautifully right now. It's turned out to be one of the best vintages. René was very skeptical at the beginning. He didn't want us to show it to Parker, and that's why he never tasted it. In fact, it's turned out to be one of the best vintages of all, and it's still showing brilliantly. And we have various other vintages that are doing very well. The 2017, which is the current vintage, is beginning to show well, but it's still young. it'll evolve nicely. The 2016, that scored 98 points and is beginning to show beautifully too. And then you have the 15 was another good vintage. It's very rare we have a bad vintage. The most difficult vintage I think we had was 2011. That's because it was very hot just before the vintage. But that was also the case in many areas of France and Spain.
How was 2017, which is the vintage that we're currently
2017. 17 was a very current vintage. 17 showing
yes, how is that?
Showing very well. How was the vintage? It
yes.
was very good vintage. Yeah. Sorry, we were breaking up a bit. I didn't hear the question exactly.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering how the quality of the 2017 vintage was.
Oh yes, no, I think it's it probably it's one of the finest vintages. I think maybe not quite the power of the 16, but probably a bit more elegance. It's more refined. It'll be a lovely wine. It just needs a little bit more time in bottle, I guess. Like it's only been bottled less than a year, so it needs a bit more time. But it'll be, I think, very elegant, very pure. Probably just a little less powerful, but than the 16, but with more elegance. Anything that goes well with Burgundy would go well with Espectacle as well.
It's interesting.
Burgundy has that lovely texture that you have from also from the acidity. Mm-hmm.
It can be.
I call the Grenache sometimes the Pinot Noir of the South. Sorry.
Yes, I was saying it's interesting you compared it with Burgundy because I've heard comparisons with Burgundy before, and we've even used it as a ringer in tastings, and it's surprising where it comes out in blind tastings.
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. I think of what I call it, as I was saying, the Pinot Noir of the South, but particularly in this particular case with Espectacle, is the you have that texture, very elegant texture in the wine, thanks to the acidity and the balance with the fruit, which could make it easy to confuse it with a good Burgundy. Exactly, that or Châteauroux. Yes, yeah, also with a great Rhone wine. From Châteauneuf du Pape also could be. Indeed. That area could be some confusion between, some very good comparison between Espectacle and the wines of the Southern Rhone. Well, it's certainly a unique wine, and thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, no, it was more of an observation, and I'm interested in your thought that it sounds like basically what you do is the vines produce the grapes, you take the grapes to the winery and the wine is made. It's very little intervention, very, I won't say simple, but pretty much the wine is a direct reflection of exactly where it comes
from. Basically, it is fairly simple and straightforward. We take the wines in very small containers. The grapes are not damaged at all during that trip. And then then we cool the grapes down. That I didn't mention that, the maceration, which will bring the temperature of the grapes down to 4 degrees. That means the fermentation won't start right away, and that happens before the sorting table and the destemming.
It's interesting, actually. We've had tastings of Espectacle the day after it was open, the first tasting, and we find it's improved overnight. So it's, there's not many wines that will improve for the next day, and Espectacle is one of those.
Exactly. Yes. No. It does a little bit of. That's why the decanting is important.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the time, Christopher, and thank you for taking us through the wines. There's been an incredible amount of back and forth on the chat line as well. And I hope we'll all have a chance to enjoy them with you, whether here in the United States, in Bordeaux, or at the winery very soon. And we'll look forward to the release of the 2017, which I know is imminent. So thank you very much.